High above the glowing lights of the city, where the distant hum of traffic blended into a soft evening rhythm, Adrian Vale sat alone in the wide glass penthouse that crowned the tallest tower downtown. From far away, people imagined that billionaires lived in constant excitement, parties, deals, flashing cameras, and endless movement. But tonight was quiet. The city looked like a calm ocean of lights, gently shimmering beneath a deep blue sky. Adrian leaned back in his chair and slowly turned a glass of sparkling water in his hand. Years ago, he had started with almost nothing, a small rented room, a second-hand laptop, and a stubborn dream that refused to leave him. Now his company's name lit skyscrapers across continents. And magazines called him one of the most powerful businessmen in the world. Yet, in the peaceful silence of the penthouse, power felt strangely distant. The floor-to-ceiling windows carried reflections of the city like drifting stars, and Adrian watched them with thoughtful eyes. Success had arrived faster than he ever imagined, one bold idea, then another, until investors, employees, and reporters filled his days. But the night belonged to stillness. Somewhere far below, a late train passed like a soft whisper, and the sound reminded him of the nights he once spent working in small cafes, chasing ideas while the world slept. Those memories had not faded, they simply rested quietly beneath the layers of wealth and recognition. Adrian stood and walked slowly toward the window. The city lights stretched endlessly, yet the sky above remained calm and wide, untouched by ambition. For the first time in many weeks, he allowed himself to breathe deeply and simply watch the world move without him. Tomorrow would bring new decisions, new headlines, and new expectations. But tonight, the billionaire allowed the silence to settle around him like a gentle tide, and in that quiet moment, the dramatic story of his life felt less like a storm and more like a slow, unfolding journey. Morning arrived gently over the city, painting the tall buildings with a soft golden glow that slowly replaced the quiet blue of night. Adrian Vale had always woken early, a habit formed long before the world knew his name. Even now, as a billionaire with assistants who managed nearly every detail of his schedule, he preferred the calm hours before the city fully stirred. In the quiet kitchen of his penthouse, he prepared a simple cup of coffee himself, listening to the distant murmur of traffic beginning far below. The steam curled upward like a slow ribbon, and for a moment he simply watched it rise and fade into the air. Many people imagined that wealth removed all responsibilities. But Adrian knew the opposite was true. With success came thousands of decisions, some small, some enormous, each one shaping the lives of people who trusted his company and its future. Today would be no different. Meetings waited, investors expected answers, and new ideas floated through his mind like drifting clouds. Yet the morning itself felt peaceful, almost suspended in time. He stepped onto the wide balcony, the cool air carrying the scent of the sea from somewhere beyond the distant skyline. Far below, the city moved slowly into motion, buses rolling through wide avenues, office lights flickering on, and early pedestrians walking with quiet determination. Adrian leaned lightly against the railing and let the calm of the moment settle around him. When he first started his company, mornings were filled with urgency and uncertainty. Every day had felt like a climb up an endless hill. Now the hill had turned into a mountain he had already reached, yet strangely, the view from the top felt less triumphant than he once imagined. Success had brought comfort and influence, but it had also raised deeper questions about purpose and direction. Adrian took a slow sip of his coffee and watched the sunlight spread across the city like a gentle tide of gold. Somewhere within the quiet of the morning, he sensed that the next chapter of his life might not be about building something bigger, but about discovering something more meaningful. And with that quiet thought resting in his mind, the billionaire turned back inside, ready to meet the day that was slowly waking beneath him. Later that afternoon, after the morning meetings had passed and the steady rhythm of business had slowed, Adrian Vale found himself sitting quietly in his private office at the top floor of the company's headquarters. The room was large and elegant, with wide windows that allowed sunlight to stretch across the polished wooden floor. On the walls hung modern paintings and framed awards that celebrated the company's remarkable success. Yet Adrian's eyes rested not on those symbols of achievement, but on a small framed photograph placed quietly on the corner of his desk. It showed a tiny apartment room from many years ago. The furniture was simple, almost worn, and a single desk stood near the window with an old laptop resting on it. That room had been the true beginning of everything. Adrian leaned back in his chair and allowed the memory to unfold slowly in his mind. In those early days, the nights had been long and uncertain. He had worked under a dim lamp while the city outside slept, writing code, testing ideas, and wondering whether any of it would truly matter. Sometimes doubt had crept in quietly, like a shadow in the corner of the room. But the dream had always remained stronger than the doubt. Each small step forward had felt like crossing a quiet bridge toward an unknown future. Investors had not believed in him at first. Many meetings had ended with polite smiles and gentle refusals. Yet Adrian had continued. Driven by a calm determination that surprised even himself. Now, years later, the world described his journey as brilliant and visionary, as if success had been inevitable from the very beginning. But he knew the truth was softer and more fragile than that story. Success had grown slowly, like a seed that patiently pushes through the soil toward the sunlight. Adrian lifted the photograph and studied it for a moment, remembering the quiet courage of the young man who had once sat at that desk. The city outside his office window now moved with energy and confidence, filled with people working inside buildings that carried his company's name. Yet in his heart, Adrian still felt connected to that small room and the quiet nights where everything had begun. Carefully, he placed the photograph back on the desk, and a calm smile appeared on his face as the memory gently settled back into silence. As the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, Adrian Vale remained in his office while the busy sounds of the company gradually faded beyond the walls. Employees finished their work, elevators carried people down toward the streets, and the building settled into a quieter rhythm. Adrian had always enjoyed this hour of the day, when the rush of business softened and the world seemed to breathe more slowly. A gentle orange glow from the setting sun stretched across his desk, touching the edges of papers and the smooth surface of his laptop. Just as he was about to close the computer and leave for the night, a soft notification sound appeared on the screen. It was a message, simple and short. The sender's name, however, made Adrian pause. It was Daniel Mercer, a person he had not spoken to in many years. Daniel had once been one of the very first people who believed in Adrian's ideas. Long before investors arrived or newspapers began writing about his company, Daniel had been there during the uncertain early days, offering encouragement and quiet support. Adrian opened the message slowly. The words were calm and thoughtful, much like the man who had written them. Daniel explained that he was visiting the city for a short time and wondered if Adrian might have a moment to meet, perhaps just for coffee and conversation. There was no urgency in the message, only a friendly tone that carried the warmth of old memories. Adrian leaned back in his chair and stared out through the tall window beside him. The sky above the city was slowly deepening into shades of purple and gold. For years, his life had been filled with new contacts, new partners, and new opportunities. Yet old friendships, especially those from the earliest chapters of life, often carried a special kind of meaning. Daniel had seen Adrian before the success, before the headlines, before the title of billionaire ever existed. Those were the days when dreams were fragile but full of hope. Adrian typed a short reply, accepting the invitation and suggesting a quiet cafe near the river where the city lights reflected peacefully on the water at night. When he sent the message, a strange sense of anticipation settled gently in his mind. Sometimes, the most important moments in life did not arrive with dramatic announcements. Instead, they appeared quietly, like a simple message on a quiet evening, opening the door to memories and conversations that might change the direction of the future. Adrian closed his laptop, stood up slowly, and looked once more at the fading sunset beyond the window before leaving the office for the night. That evening, the city felt calmer than usual as Adrian Vale walked along the quiet river promenade. Soft lights reflected on the water, stretching like golden lines that gently moved with the slow current. The air carried a cool breeze, and the distant sounds of the city blended into a peaceful background hum. Adrian had chosen a small cafe beside the river, a place that was simple and warm, far from the luxury restaurants where people often expected to see someone like him. Inside, the lights were soft and the atmosphere relaxed. A few people sat quietly with books or laptops, while gentle music drifted through the room. Adrian arrived early and took a seat near the window where he could watch the calm water outside. For a few moments, he simply listened to the quiet clinking of cups and the distant laughter of two friends sitting at a nearby table. Soon, the door opened, and Daniel Mercer stepped inside. Time had changed him slightly, his hair carried a little more gray, and his face showed the calm confidence of someone who had lived thoughtfully, but his warm smile was exactly the same. When Daniel noticed Adrian, he walked over with an easy, familiar energy, as if the many years between them had quietly disappeared. They greeted each other with a handshake that quickly turned into a friendly embrace. Sitting across from one another, they began to talk, first about simple things, the city, the weather, the passing years. The conversation flowed naturally, like two old friends continuing a story that had only paused for a while. Daniel spoke about his travels, about working with small community projects in different countries, helping young entrepreneurs build their own ideas. Adrian listened carefully, feeling both admiration and curiosity. Daniel's life had taken a very different path from his own. While Adrian had built a global company, Daniel had chosen a quieter road, helping individuals and small communities grow their dreams step by step. As the night deepened and the river outside shimmered under the city lights, Adrian realized something gentle but surprising. Daniel spoke with a calm satisfaction that did not depend on wealth or recognition. There was a peaceful certainty in his voice, as if he had discovered a kind of success that could not be measured by numbers or headlines. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair and looked out at the quiet water, wondering if perhaps the next chapter of his own dramatic life might also be waiting somewhere beyond the tall towers of business and ambition. The evening continued to unfold slowly in the quiet cafe by the river, where the gentle reflections of city lights shimmered across the dark water outside. Adrian Vale and Daniel Mercer sat comfortably across from each other, their conversation moving easily from one memory to another. There was no rush, no pressure, only the calm rhythm of two people reconnecting after many years apart. A waiter quietly brought fresh tea, and the soft clink of the cup seemed to blend with the distant murmur of the river. Daniel spoke about the small towns he had visited in different parts of the world, places where opportunity often arrived slowly but hope remained strong. He described helping young people turn simple ideas into small businesses, local cafes, repair shops, tiny technology startups that began in modest rooms much like the one Adrian had once worked in long ago. Adrian listened with thoughtful attention, imagining those distant places and the quiet determination of the people Daniel described. For a moment, he felt transported back to the early days of his own journey, when success had not yet been defined by numbers but by possibility. Daniel smiled gently and said something that lingered in the air even after the words were spoken. "You know," he said calmly, "sometimes success is not about building the tallest tower. Sometimes it's about helping someone else build their first small door." Adrian looked down at his tea, watching the faint ripples in the cup slowly settle. The words were simple, but they carried a quiet weight. For years, he had measured progress through growth charts, global markets, and technological breakthroughs. Yet Daniel's perspective revealed another kind of achievement, one built on patience, human connection, and shared progress. Outside the cafe window, a boat moved slowly along the river, its lights drifting gently across the dark water like small stars. Adrian realized that while his life had been dramatic and extraordinary, it had also moved very quickly, often leaving little space to notice moments like this one. Daniel, however, seemed to carry a calm balance that Adrian admired deeply. As the night grew quieter and the cafe slowly emptied, Adrian began to sense that this unexpected meeting might mark the beginning of something new. Not a new business venture or another ambitious project, but perhaps a quieter journey, one that might bring meaning not only to his own life, but to the lives of others as well. And as the two friends continued their conversation under the soft cafe lights, the billionaire felt a rare and peaceful curiosity about the path that might lie ahead. When Adrian Vale finally left the cafe that night, the city had grown calm and almost dreamlike. The streets were quieter now, and the soft glow of streetlights stretched along the river like a peaceful path of golden reflections. Daniel had already said goodbye, promising they would meet again before leaving the city, and Adrian walked slowly along the promenade, letting the cool night air settle his thoughts. Their conversation had not been dramatic or intense, yet something about it continued to echo gently in his mind. Daniel's words about helping others build their first small door repeated themselves quietly as Adrian watched the slow movement of the water. For years, his world had been built around expansion, bigger offices, larger teams, global markets that stretched across continents. But tonight, a different idea began to take shape in the quiet corners of his thoughts. What if success could move in the opposite direction for a while? What if, instead of building upward, he focused on reaching outward? Adrian stopped for a moment and leaned lightly against the railing beside the river. Somewhere across the water, a distant bridge glowed softly under the night sky, and the reflection of its lights moved slowly with the current. He imagined young people in small cities or quiet towns, sitting in small rooms with ideas that felt too fragile to share with the world. Years ago, he had been one of them. He remembered the uncertainty, the late nights, the feeling that success was a distant mountain hidden somewhere beyond the horizon. Slowly, a gentle sense of excitement began to grow within him. It was not the fast, sharp excitement of business deals or financial success. Instead, it was calmer, like the quiet beginning of a sunrise. Adrian realized that he had the resources, the knowledge, and the experience to help thousands of people take their first steps forward. The idea was simple: create small innovation centers in different cities around the world, places where young dreamers could learn, experiment, and build their ideas without fear of failure. He smiled slightly as the thought settled into place. It felt strangely refreshing, almost like rediscovering the spirit that had guided him in the earliest days of his own journey. After a few more quiet moments by the river, Adrian turned and began walking toward his car. The city lights shimmered peacefully behind him, and for the first time in many years, the billionaire felt the gentle excitement of a completely new beginning quietly unfolding before him. The following morning arrived with a soft silver light spreading across the city, and Adrian Vale woke earlier than usual. For a few quiet moments, he remained by the window of his penthouse, watching the peaceful sky slowly brighten above the tall buildings. The idea from the night before had stayed with him, resting calmly in his mind like a seed waiting for the right moment to grow. It did not feel rushed or uncertain. Instead, it carried a steady clarity that felt both exciting and deeply natural. After preparing his morning coffee, Adrian sat at the long wooden table in the living room with a simple notebook in front of him. Although his company used the most advanced technology in the world, he had always liked writing new ideas by hand first. The blank page felt open and honest, free from the pressure of expectations. Slowly, he began to write. The first words were simple: the First Door Initiative. Beneath the title, he described a vision of small innovation centers placed in cities where opportunity was often limited. These spaces would be calm, welcoming places where young entrepreneurs could learn skills, receive mentorship, and experiment with their ideas without worrying about immediate success or failure. Adrian imagined workshops filled with quiet creativity, people working together, sharing knowledge, and building something meaningful step by step. As he continued writing, the plan grew clearer. His company could support the centers financially, but the heart of the project would be the community itself. Experienced mentors, local leaders, and young dreamers would work side by side. Adrian realized that this new project did not require the same intense competition that had defined much of his business career. Instead, it would be built on patience and cooperation. The thought brought a calm satisfaction he had not felt in a long time. By the time the city below had fully awakened, the notebook contained several pages of ideas. Adrian closed it gently and leaned back in his chair. Through the wide window, the morning sun now lit the streets with warm energy. And people hurried through their daily routines without knowing that a quiet idea had just begun to take shape high above them. Adrian understood that turning the idea into reality would take time and careful planning. Yet for the first time in many years, the path ahead felt less like a race and more like a thoughtful journey. And with a peaceful smile, the billionaire stood up, ready to take the first step toward opening doors for others. In the weeks that followed, Adrian Vale's days took on a new rhythm that felt different from anything he had experienced before. His company continued to operate with its usual speed and precision, but alongside the familiar meetings and reports, another project quietly began to grow. The notebook that held the idea for the First Door initiative rarely left his side. Sometimes Adrian added notes early in the morning while the city was still quiet, and other times he wrote new thoughts late at night when the world outside his penthouse windows had fallen into calm silence. Slowly, the idea transformed into something more detailed and real. Adrian spoke with educators, entrepreneurs, and community leaders from different parts of the world. Instead of discussing profits or market expansion, the conversations focused on learning, creativity, and opportunity. He found these discussions strangely refreshing. They reminded him of the early days when curiosity had guided him more than strategy. One afternoon, Adrian visited a small neighborhood workshop on the edge of the city. Inside the modest building, a group of young students worked on simple technology projects, small robots, creative software, and handmade inventions that filled the room with quiet excitement. The space was not large, and the equipment was basic, but the energy inside was alive with imagination. Adrian walked slowly through the room, watching the students share ideas and help one another solve problems. None of them knew that the tall, calm visitor observing their work was one of the world's most successful billionaires. To them, he was simply another guest curious about their projects. As he listened to their conversations, Adrian felt something warm and familiar return to his thoughts. It was the same feeling he had known long ago in his small apartment when every new idea had felt like a door opening toward possibility. Before leaving, he spoke briefly with the group, encouraging them to keep experimenting and learning from each challenge they faced. When Adrian stepped back outside, the afternoon sun rested gently over the quiet neighborhood streets. For the first time in many years, success felt less like a destination and more like a path he could share with others. The First Door initiative was still only an idea taking its first steps, but Adrian could already sense that its journey would travel far beyond the tall towers of his own achievements. And as he drove slowly back toward the center of the city, the billionaire felt a calm certainty that the most meaningful chapter of his life was only just beginning. Several months later, the city looked much the same from the tall windows of Adrian Vale's penthouse, yet something within him had quietly changed. The lights of the skyline still shimmered across the evening horizon, and the gentle rhythm of the city continued below, but Adrian now watched it with a calmer and more thoughtful mind. The First Door initiative had begun its journey into the world. The first small innovation centers had opened in a few carefully chosen cities, each one designed to be a welcoming place where young dreamers could explore their ideas. They were not grand buildings or impressive towers. Instead, they were warm, creative spaces filled with simple desks, tools, and people eager to learn. Adrian had visited several of them during the past weeks. In each place, he saw something quietly beautiful, groups of young people sharing ideas, mentors guiding them through challenges, and small projects slowly growing into real possibilities. There were no flashing headlines or dramatic celebrations, yet the atmosphere in those rooms carried a special kind of energy. It was the energy of beginnings. One evening, Adrian returned once again to the river promenade where he had first spoken with Daniel months earlier. The water flowed gently beneath the soft glow of the city lights, just as it had that night. Adrian leaned against the railing and allowed himself to reflect on the long journey that had brought him here. The dramatic life of a billionaire had been filled with ambition, risk, and remarkable success. Yet the quiet satisfaction he felt now was different from anything he had experienced before. It was softer, steadier, and deeply peaceful. Somewhere across the river, a boat moved slowly through the night, its lights drifting across the water like distant stars. Adrian smiled gently, realizing that the true meaning of success had never been about reaching the highest point alone. Instead, it was about creating paths that others could follow, opening doors that once seemed impossible to reach. The night air carried a cool breeze, and the city hummed softly around him. Adrian took a slow breath and looked out across the calm water. His life had been dramatic, extraordinary, and full of unexpected turns. But in this quiet moment by the river, he understood something simple and comforting: the greatest stories are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes, the most meaningful chapters are written quietly, one open door at a time.